10 long-term health effects. Exposure to the Great Chinese Famine, particularly during prenatal and early childhood stages, has been linked to a higher risk of tuberculosis, TB, in adulthood. This impact extended beyond those directly exposed, affecting future generations. A 2020 study revealed that severe malnutrition during key developmental phases could have long-lasting health consequences. Researchers found a greater prevalence of TB among individuals exposed to famine in utero or early childhood, suggesting that malnutrition may influence health across generations through epigenetic changes. The study analyzed health data from individuals born before, during, and after the famine, as well as their descendants. Those exposed had a notably higher incidence of TB, even after adjusting for factors like socioeconomic status and healthcare access. Additionally, the research showed that famine exposure increased vulnerability to other infectious diseases and chronic health conditions, underscoring the widespread effects of early malnutrition on lifelong health. 9. Rural versus urban impact. Mao Zedong's push to transform China into an industrialized socialist state involved collectivizing agriculture and enforcing communal living, where large groups worked together to boost productivity. Unfortunately, these policies led to agricultural collapse, as unrealistic targets and poor planning reduced crop yields, triggering severe food shortages. The rural population, which made up the majority of China, suffered the most. Rural communities were forced to implement inefficient farming methods and operate backyard furnaces for steel production, diverting labor away from agriculture and worsening the food crisis. Along with reduced food production, increased grain exports to meet state demands left rural areas in famine. Although urban areas were also affected, the impact was less severe. Urban residents faced food rationing and malnutrition, but the government's focus on sustaining industrial output meant cities generally had better access to resources. However, the economic mismanagement and resource allocation problems took a toll on both urban and rural populations, resulting in widespread hardship. 8. The Four Pests disaster. A key factor contributing to the Great Chinese Famine was Mao Zedong's 1958 Four Pests campaign, which aimed to improve public health and agriculture by eliminating rats, flies, mosquitoes, and sparrows. The focus on sparrows, considered a threat to crops, led to ecological imbalance. Sparrows naturally control insect populations, and their mass eradication caused a surge in crop-damaging insects. With no natural predators, these insects thrived, severely harming agricultural output. This decline in crop yields worsened the famine. In an effort to restore balance, China imported 250,000 sparrows from the Soviet Union, which helped control the insect infestation. However, the damage had already been done. The campaign later shifted to targeting bedbugs, but the long-term effects of this ecological disruption persisted for years. 7. Abandonment of infants. During the Great Chinese Famine, thousands of children from Shanghai were relocated to Inner Mongolia in an attempt to save them from starvation. Organized by the central government, this effort sought to provide the children with refuge in a less affected region. However, the evacuation process was disorganized, causing many children to lose their identities and records during the journey. Upon arrival, the children encountered a harsh and unfamiliar environment, and many did not survive long. Local authorities set up nurseries to help the children adapt before placing them with local families. One dedicated caretaker took in 28 children, despite her lack of experience. While some children were adopted by local families, the process was often difficult, with instances of mistreatment. Decades later, these children, known as the Shanghai dolls, began to reconnect with their roots and with each other. The government eventually acknowledged their struggles, leading to greater recognition of their unique history. 6. Inflated grain production reports. Local officials inflated grain production figures, which were used to determine tax quotas, leading the state to seize a much larger portion of the crop than was sustainable. In some regions, nearly all the harvested grain was taken as tax, leaving little to nothing for the farmers themselves. When tax quotas weren't met, officials who had exaggerated the production numbers often refused to acknowledge their mistakes, instead accusing farmers of hiding grain. This led to violent crackdowns, with farmers being hunted, beaten, and tortured by their neighbors under orders from local leaders. The appropriated grain frequently remained in state warehouses or was sent to cities where rations were reduced, with even Mao reportedly forgoing meat for months. Malnutrition became widespread among the urban population, leading to conditions like edema. By the summer of 1960, as food supplies in rural areas ran out, mass deaths began. Peasants collapsed in fields, on roadsides, and in their homes, where their families, too weak to bury them, watched as flies and rats consumed their bodies. In desperate acts, some families concealed the deaths of relatives to continue receiving their food rations. Starvation forced people to forage for anything edible, such as seeds, grasses, leaves, and tree bark. When these ran out, they resorted to boiling leather or consuming soil, despite the severe harm this caused to their digestive systems. 5. Forced labor during the Great Leap Forward. China's campaign to rapidly industrialize in the late 1950s, the Communist Party imposed forced labor on millions of people. Many laborers were relocated from farms to steel production facilities, disrupting families and leaving collective farms to be run by women, children, and the elderly. The party also abolished private farming, forcing rural farmers into collectivized farms where all production, resource distribution, and food allocation was centrally controlled. This centralization led to a significant drop in grain production. Additionally, hundreds of thousands of individuals died from forced labor, harsh conditions, and exposure while working on large-scale irrigation and communal farming projects. The combination of forced relocations, grueling working conditions, and inefficient agricultural control caused immense suffering and loss of life during this period. 4. Graves converted into farmland. During the Great Leap Forward, cemeteries were forced to contribute to China's economic goals by repurposing their land for agricultural use. As part of a broader effort to boost food production, cemetery land was used to grow crops and raise livestock, particularly pigs. Official reports touted the success of these conversions, with formerly non-productive graveyards yielding abundant vegetables like carrots and cabbages, and housing pigs in makeshift shelters. The initiative was promoted as an example of how even unconventional land could be used for agricultural expansion. Burial spaces were reduced to narrow strips between existing graves, while many less significant cemeteries were completely leveled and turned into farmland. Official records indicated that 54,000 graves were exhumed, but they did not clarify what happened to the remains. There is no evidence to suggest that efforts were made to relocate the graves, as the cemeteries were seemingly erased and the land fully repurposed for farming. 3. Delayed admission of Mao's mistakes. In 2013, Chinese President Xi Jinping made a rare acknowledgement of Mao Zedong's major mistakes, particularly during the Cultural Revolution and the Great Leap Forward. Xi recognized Mao's crucial role in founding the People's Republic of China and unifying the nation, but also admitted that his policies led to severe economic collapse and social unrest. Xi specifically pointed to the Great Leap Forward's disastrous agricultural policies and the famine that caused millions of deaths. Despite these grave errors, Xi emphasized that Mao's contributions to China's revolution, his leadership against imperialism and feudalism, and his influence on the country's development should not be forgotten. The fact that it took until 2013 for such an admission, considering the scale of the suffering caused by Mao's policies, raises concerns about the transparency and accountability within China's leadership and its historical narrative. 2. The exact number of deaths caused by China's Great Famine is still uncertain, with estimates ranging from 15 to 45 million. The lack of reliable records and the Chinese government's control over historical information make it difficult to determine the true death toll. Researchers use various sources, such as local records, survivor accounts, and population studies, but these sources are often incomplete or biased. During the famine, China's isolationist policies prevented the world from knowing about the crisis, making it difficult to respond or understand the full extent of the tragedy. The secrecy surrounding this period continues to hinder efforts to fully understand and acknowledge the magnitude of the famine. 1. The Great Famine in China was a time of extreme hardship and suffering, leading to some of the most horrific acts imaginable. In Guangxi province, desperate people resorted to cannibalism as a means of survival. This was fueled by the chaotic atmosphere created by Mao Zedong's radical policies and the violent rhetoric of local officials. Victims, labeled as class enemies, were subjected to brutal public executions, and their bodies were sometimes consumed in a twisted display of political fervor. In the years following the famine, reports of cannibalism continued to emerge. The head of the Anhui Police Department revealed that there were 1,289 such cases in 1960 alone. Survivors described the gruesome practice of exhuming graves and consuming the internal organs of the deceased. Due to the extreme emaciation of the bodies, flesh was often not suitable for consumption, so people focused on eating organs like the liver and heart. There were even reports of individuals who made a living by selling dead bodies to starving people.